The Fireside chat is actually just about starting. And welcome again, Sean. Welcome again, Ken. I hope you're hearing me well now. And Jasjit, of course. And this is going to be roughly 30 minutes. We'll take the first 15 minutes to talk about your own presentations and just to moderate this panel a little bit. And then I'll have a few questions from our attendees. So we'll try to also go through them if you don't mind. Great. So Sean, actually, I'd like to start with you, if you wouldn't mind. The rise and fall of great products and the BlackBerry story. You had first-hand chance to talk with the CEOs or the co-CEOs of BlackBerry or Research in Motion while you were writing the book. And one of the questions I had when reading your book was really, did they realize what happened in Insights past these years, or in the middle of the fights, in the middle of the confusion, they were not really so adamant to what was going on. So I would really like to understand whether there was a delta between what was happening in 2007, 2008, 2009, in the middle of the fight, and then past 5 or 6 or maybe almost 10 years when you started writing the book, if in retrospect they really understand that or understood that the seismic forces of innovation were already passed beyond a certain point that they could not really do anything.
Well, thank you very much. You can hear me okay?
We can, yeah.
Great, okay. Thanks for the question. I think one of the interesting things we get into in the book is, when this company started and for the first few years of its development and growth, the two co-CEOs, Mike and Jim, had their offices across the hall from each other. And as the company grew, and part of the reason is in Waterloo, Ontario, it's a small town and you can't build buildings that high. And so they were sort of constrained in how they could grow. And so BlackBerry, or Research in Motion, as it was called at the time, RIM, started to sort of spread all over Waterloo. And you went from CEOs being in the two co-CEOs being across the hallway from each other to being across town with their own teams. They had a chief operating officer who was very strongly against that. He really wanted to keep them all together. But Jim Balsillie had this idea that he didn't want to become like a big incumbent company that had what they used to call Mahogany Row, this nice stately bank of offices that were far removed from the customers, far removed from the reality of the company. I think part of the reason, actually, that the two of them were so willing to sit down with Jackie and I and tell their story, there were two main reasons, I believe. One is because they felt for Canada they had accomplished a great thing on the way up, and that rise story had been sort of forgotten as people started to make fun of BlackBerry and see it as a bit of a loser. So they wanted to kind of capture that story on the way up. I think also they wanted to figure out what exactly happened, because as this organization grew and you had these two solitudes developing with literally the two co-CEOs across town from each other, and I think they sort of lost a sense of what the other was thinking, how things were viewed within the company. I mean, there was practically civil war, or certainly a civil war of ideas going on within the company as things started to, the wheels started to fall off. The product people were blaming the salespeople were blaming the product people. The board was sort of out of touch. And I think a lot of people were missing the big picture. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. I don't know, Ken, were you a BlackBerry user back in the day?
I stayed with them right until the end. In fact, I didn't get my iPhone until it was forced upon me by the president of one of the startup companies I was working at. When everyone else had one, I was still carrying around my little Pearl. I was a huge fan. Look, it's a sad story in some level, but I love the product and it solved so many needs. I actually even used it for my personal phone as well. I've had my own fair share of like experiences. I actually worked back in the day with Kodak when it actually acquired well, I was actually with a company called Ophoto. It was purchased as the online division, and we were supposed to sort of really turn around the consumer division of Kodak. And just watching, like everybody had great intentions, but just when a company is just not set up to innovate and has a lot of the old ways of thinking and can't break down its own barriers, it really does get in its own way. And I saw that all firsthand too. So, you know, not great, but I think there's lots of lessons from these larger companies for us all, not to get too cocky and not to sort of think that we can't be out innovated, and that culture really, really matters, and making sure that your internal company can make fast decisions and people can be empowered and you're prepared to make mistakes. And all the things that I saw just weren't happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because sometimes it's not just up to the product management team. You know, the CEO alignment with the product team is also very important, right? And how the executive structure of the team is aligned with product seems to have failed, at least in BlackBerry case. Do you have any take on that from your experience from Code, any previous experience as well, Ken? Or how to create better alignment, right? Because, you know, it's not just the product's people fault.
Well, I mean, I failed, right? I failed to do that in a product role. So I think it does a lot come down to selling the vision and trying to actually get everybody excited about what could be, and making sure there's the context is there. We're not looking, if in a big company, and often not looking at smaller companies and what they're doing that could be very innovative and interesting. It is also about, I think, getting smaller teams to be able to go off and try things, and not necessarily requiring all that decision making to be kind of fed up. Those were some of the things that I saw were getting in our way. So yeah, it's interesting how larger companies sometimes need to really think small to break through that.
So can you tell us a little bit about the story, how, because you in your presentation you were saying that you were with Masterclass when they decided to move into the subscription business. How was that process? Everyone is getting into the subscription business nowadays, but I guess Masterclass was one of the first. So how was the thought process that led to that decision? Were you part of it? Do you know the story behind it?
Yeah, actually, no. To be clear, I joined after it had made the transition, or started the transition more precisely, into a subscription business. And in fact, the decision to bring on a head of product role, I believe, was partly driven by the fact that there was a transition from being kind of a class marketing, class production kind of company where you could sell classes. It was all about getting the marketing working, all about getting the content produced, to the fact that they now had a catalog, and it was about finding some kind of ongoing value. And when you actually have a subscription business, what I love about subscription businesses is you're much more naturally aligned to long-term value delivery to your customer. You actually have to think about, how do you create a relationship, and how do you continually try to engage and deliver new value, and keep them basically coming back so they pay you again. And so a lot of what I was doing when I arrived there was basically trying to, well, I owned retention, and it was about setting up product features and changing some of the ways that we were thinking, how we and trying to get us to start tracking things like engagement and establishing a perspective about what kind of retention we should be expecting in terms of lifetime value, really getting all of the discussions with customers and users, and just changing those kind of the way that we were thinking about gathering data. That was all the job, was just really trying to drive a little bit more of a customer-centric, long-term relationship view to the business, and then ultimately driving up engagement and retention, which is very, very hard to do.
Yeah, I bet it is. Maybe Jasjit, I think the question that begs to be is meant to do, but one of my personal curiosities is how big was BlackBerry in India back then? Were you a fan as well, or you just skipped it and went directly to Android or iPhone?
Well, I lived on the other side of the fence. I was in BlackBerry from 2007 to 2012, so lived through this. So when, like, very well captured, Sean. I think you beautifully captured the various nuances in that journey. I think one thing that really, like, all of us were super passionate about BlackBerry, right? All of us inside, we actually felt that, right? When we all saw the iPhone and iPod being launched, and the first thing that was like, oh, let's see what we can do from where we are and kind of get ahead of the curve again, right? And a lot of it was also dependent on the platform. I think we discount a lot of platform work, or the support that is needed at the platform level. But I think that was one of the main crucial elements that allowed people like Androids of the world and iOSs of the world to build capabilities to improve efficiencies, and basically not worry about problems that we were actually stuck with, right? Like, for example, uh, the support for apps, right? The support for the various things that you could do on a phone. Like, I remember, right? This was a folklore in BlackBerry as well. Like, I think Mike or James, someone of us actually said this: that why would someone play games on a phone, right? It is a business phone,
Yeah.
right? So the priority should be something else. So we were all focused there, but we were also keeping an eye on this. I think one of the first tasks when I landed up in BlackBerry was, I was in Bay Area. I was in Redwood City, Redwood Shores, and the first task, and we created a platform engagement group, and the first task was to understand from the startups how BlackBerry is in terms of building an ecosystem for the various startups on BlackBerry. I was one of the few people who actually went into Siri before even Apple went there, right? We were trying to talk to them as well. Like, it was crazy. The main feedback that we got was like, you don't have the capabilities, right? It was primarily a J2ME stack on which we were like over engineering, like building all the kind of APIs that are needed to support. But the demand from what the users wanted to what the platform could support, like, there was only limited that it could scale to. So I think that was very crucial. And as a fan, of course, like, I think all through those 4 or 5 years, even 5 years after that I left BlackBerry, like, my family, my friends, everyone was like, what is the new model coming? What is that coming? So I think it was a huge craze all across the world: India, South Asia, Southeast Asia, you name the country and you would have it, right? So it was a really passionate time. We loved it, and really enjoyed working in BlackBerry for sure.
So Jasjit, maybe just using your reframing framework, how can companies navigate this innovator's dilemma? Because one of the striking things that when I was reading Sean's book was that the innovator's dilemma book was part of the almost compulsory library of the BlackBerry. So it's not like the executive team was not a part of what was going on in the literature and the state of the art in management practice back then. But somehow they didn't they skipped the book, or they didn't apply what was in the book, or they just didn't understand what was there. So what's your take on that? What kind of initiatives are you guys doing inside OLX to make sure that you're not skipping the next wave, that you have this empowered teams that are independent, as Ken was talking about?
Yeah. So I think one of the key elements of this is that this is always a on discovery on mode, right? Wherein you are discovering nuances, you are discovering behaviors. So instead of kind of focusing on one behavior and really going after it, and of course that not observing the whole context, you really need to also continue discovery phase, continue understanding the user patterns, continue understanding where in their life did spend a lot of time. How do you optimize it? How do you understand the value that you are delivering? Because what will happen is the user needs are same, but the expectations evolve, right? You need to do a job. You will do that job, but how efficiently will you do it? How engagingly you will do it is something that products will evolve, right? And for that, you need to be closer to the ground to understand a lot of nuances. And that is where even in OLX we spend a lot of time understanding our customers in terms of in their natural behaviors, trying to understand like what are the key problems, where how do we stack rank the biggest problem that they have, uh, what is it that we can deliver for which they would be willing to pay for. So those are the key questions which in our experience, so again we have a concept of responsible product development, where we look at again the things that I talked about, problem opportunity backlog, discovery backlog, where we first validate the problems and then look at validations of solutions, which actually keep us very close to the consumers and through various channels.
All right. So last round of questions to all of you guys, and now I think I'll keep it the same for everyone. Jasjit, where do you see the next big platform coming from? Because we have just the last 15 years have been almost a monopoly of mobile. So where do you see the next 10, 15 years coming from, or two?
So I think everything gets accelerated by COVID, right? So 10 years down the road, we will be doing productized in an immersive experience, right? Where you are hooking into a system, you are looking at the world, you are interacting as though you are there. So Matrix is actually going to be real, right?
All right. So you're bullish about VR experience. I wonder what are you bullish in terms of technology as a platform or?
Yeah, well, just to hark back on my talk, and maybe I'm being a little bit too focused on just ed tech, but I think this notion of flipping from passive to interactive or active kind of immersive learning online, or how it, for a number of different industries, that actually getting super active and involved is going to be super critical. And I just think less about the platform that we're able to utilize, and more about the companies that are out there providing those services. I think there's a ton of innovation to happen, particularly in ed tech, in terms of really tapping into how people really like to learn, which is very tactile and very much hands-on. They want to practice doing skills, and we haven't cracked that yet. I'm very excited to see how that's going to evolve.
Very well. Thanks. And same to you, Sean. You are working in the media. The media has been arguably probably one of the most disruptive in the last 10, 20 years. So how do you see the next seismic forces coming in? Are we going virtual? Is it, how do you see that? And I guess you have a first-hand exposure to the startup community also in Canada. So you might see lots of great, exciting new BlackBerries in the making, maybe.
Well, I'm going to slightly dodge your question by saying, if you go back and look at the prognostications from 10, 20, 50 years ago, some of them are rather funny. If I make a statement now, you can come back and laugh at it in 2060 or 70. What I will say, and I think is worth looking at, is if you look at the iPhone, and you could not have done an iPhone in 2000. You had to, and I think that's and just to bring it back to my talk about it, I think that's probably one of the blind spots that Mike and Jim had, because they'd seen all these Silicon Valley companies try and fail to put a handheld device together with a computer.
Yeah.
The iPhone was able to Apple was able to take advantage of a number of different innovations in in computing and in miniaturization and chips, et cetera, like a whole bunch of trends that came together that they were able to build the stack on. And if you go back to the internet, it's the same thing. I mean, any technological shift we've had, any great product or whatnot, has been the result of a number of things coming together. So I think you've got to break it down to the building blocks right now that people maybe aren't necessarily talking about, or they're starting to talk about it and think, well, where can this take us? And I think you've got to look at AI and you've got to look at quantum computing. And I think, quantum is still in its very early stages.
Yeah. And you have one company is in quantum is actually a Canadian company, right?
Two of them, actually. Yeah, two of them.
Two
So
of
I
them,
think,
right?
yeah. So what quantum can't deliver yet on the promise, but when it does, I mean, we're going to have we're probably going to have a huge explosion in innovation in things like material sciences, biology, risk management. What's going to happen to cryptography? Security is going to go out the window probably if anyone with access to a quantum computer and ill intentions can crack any code in the world. So I think, and then AI, I think is just, the practitioners, the users of it, I think are just starting to spread their wings in terms of what they can do with the science. I think you've got to look at those building blocks and, do what Steve Jobs does, or they would say about Wayne Gretzky, skate to where the puck is going. Think where these technological innovations will take the world, and then build on that.
Thank you so much, Sean. So I think we will now have a few questions from our attendees from Slido. So I'll just ask my team to. Okay, so let me just tell you that I'm already on stage with my colleague Elena. She's also our co-host for the rest of the day, and we're going to choose this together as much as we can. So we have a first question here from Fiorella Soto, which is how to empathize better with customers and identify their actual needs without getting lost and losing focus of the bigger picture. So I guess I'll take this one to Jasjit. Do you want to answer this one?
Sure. I think the best way is to observe. I think what I can relate with the examples that I gave in Wink over there as well, right? The first thing that we did was started observing people as they were running, as they were going in their daily jobs, in while commuting, how they listen to music, what is the real estate they would be viewing, what are the controls that they would be having, what are the problems in while you're commuting, will you have network, will you don't have network, and basis that this observation itself gives you a good landscape to build on and then further ask questions. So again, as much as possible, look at natural environments where you can observe users in their natural behavior, and of course, like, you marry it with data and figure out what are those instances where people use your products, and then go deeper and by interviewing them and understanding their mental model as well. So I think that really helps in closing the loop there.
All right, great, thanks, Jasjit. So heading towards a next question, which is how feasible. Wait. So it's actually from Paola De Luca. Hi, Paola. Hope you're enjoying the day. For a startup of a services, B2C company, where to start to decide a price policy? So this is more of a pricing policy. So maybe Ken, do you want to give us some pricing advice for startups that are starting business to consumer? How they should price their services or?
So pricing is
I think you have an entire chapter about pricing in your book. No,
I shy away from it
You should
because
have.
I think it's one of the most hellish parts of being product manager is trying to coordinate all of that, and you've got a lot of stakeholders involved. So I mean, there are actually some pretty good frameworks. There's one I'm trying to think of the name of, which you actually ask about price in like 4 different ways, and it's basically like, when is something too cheap, when is something too expensive, when is something, you know, a good value, when is something and I forget the exact framework, so I have to look that up. If I get Paola's email address, I'll be able to dig that out. But I do think you can do sufficient research to come up with a pricing policy that says there's a range in which users are comfortable. You don't want them to be too comfortable, and so you can actually do good research on that. In addition, though, I find that you just have to test the market, and getting, particularly with B2C, you can't easily do that. It's not like you can A/B test online and sell something to one person and another to another. Masterclass, we did some testing. I wasn't in charge of that, but we did some testing by looking at adjacent markets. Like we tested in Australia and Britain to try to get a bit of a sense of what that market might be able to withstand, and then whether or not that would be appropriate for the US market. We were able to do some testing in terms of looking at some data. One of the reasons why the price point of Masterclass was developed, and I, again, was not in charge of that, but the $180 price point is that it was roughly 2 classes. And that was a very logical thing for users to kind of get their heads around. If it was like 1.5 classes or 2.5 classes, much less logical. So when we actually were testing, we were able to see that was actually a fairly comfortable price point. Looking at the data, on the average, users who were buying a single class were buying, on 50% were buying another class. So we thought, well, that was a good indicator that roughly a 2-class price point would be good. If I remember correctly, though, it was not our optimal price. That would have been in the 200s range. It was a business decision to go with something that was more easier to communicate from a value proposition, and that was the $180 price point. So these things are part science. You can analyze them. Definitely do your research. Very, very hard to test in the market. You've got to be very creative there. And because the message will get out and people will share the fact that they've been getting a different price. And then you actually need to think about some subjective things in terms of how will users intelligently make sense of that? Is that going to feel like, oh, it's 2 classes as opposed to, I don't know where that price came from.
All right. So let's maybe just head on. We have time for one more question, and while Slido is kicking in. So Ricardo is asking, hi Ricardo, what are the telltale signs one should be looking out for not to cave in the like of the great giants like RIM, Kodak, and Blockbuster did? So, you know, I think, Sean, you wrote the book on it. So you might want to tell us what were the signs, the red flags that maybe also from a management point of view, both Mike and the rest of the executive team didn't see or not, or didn't want to see back then?
You know, it's so easy to see them in retrospect, and that's sort of heartbreaking. I think a lot of companies would. Companies would say that. Certainly, you know, we got to look at some numbers that the board saw, and they broke down their sales pretty precisely, and you could start to see when their growth in America, which was their core market, plateaued and then started to slip. And I think that should have been the first all hands on deck emergency message for everyone. The thing is, they were growing in markets like India and Egypt and Indonesia, around the world. I mean, BBM was a massive success, and I think that international growth was masking a core problem in their core market. You know, it also, I think there was no one inside the company who was successfully making the point until it was too late that BlackBerry was a messaging company, first and foremost. And if messaging was becoming more of a software play than a hardware play, they really needed a strategy. And I think one of the great tragedies of BlackBerry is, look at how successful and powerful BBM or WhatsApp and Kakao Talk and all these international messaging platforms are. That all came from BBM. BlackBerry invented, I didn't really get into this in the talk, it's in the book though. And if they'd realized and not kept BBM as a closed messaging platform on the BlackBerry, but had really taken that and tried to monetize it and build it up as a software play that was agnostic to platform, look at the value they could have created if they'd been able to, having created the one dominant instant messaging platform, been able to turn that into the globe's dominant messaging platform like a Facebook or a Google. I mean, look how much value you create there. So I think having an openness to asking the big questions, and ability to truly set off a group separate from the main company that does its own thing. I mean, that's true innovator's dilemma, right? You set up a company, or you set up a division, you give them money, and then you let them do their own thing and don't make them subject to the whims of the broader corporate structure. I think those are some of the themes you could pull on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we will have to wrap it up here. So it was really a pleasure to be here with you guys, and thank you so much. We had a true, worldview perspective from Canada, India, Australia, here, and of course from here, from Lisbon. So thank you, Sean. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Jasjit. Thank you also, Elena. And I would like to invite you guys to always visit our coffee shop. It's coffee break time, by the way. So it's now time to not only thank our speakers, but also our attendees for your participation so far. So let's grab a virtual coffee together. If you stay in the main room, you can enjoy a walking tour of Lisbon, filmed by my friend Antonio. So he has been filming Lisbon and surroundings with his camera for this. And it's a great way to get to know Lisbon and surroundings if you don't know it yet, or access the link on the coffee shop and interact live with each other. So my co-host Elena Tizatos is going to take it from here, and see you back in 30 minutes. Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.